Hi, everybody. Uh, Hi, Dee Dee. Please turn your cell phones off. And thank you for coming to tonight's program featuring two of my favorite guys, Todd Purdum and Sam Wasson. Yeah. I, I'm Andrea Grossman, the founder of Writer's Block, now in our 30th season. Thanks. I want to thank my friends and colleagues here at the Ebell for letting us use this most beautiful room. The Ebell is a membership organization built by and for women, and the organization is well over 100 years old. The Ebell is so good to Writer's Block and to me, and I so appreciate it. They welcome your membership, and they will take you as a member, I promise. It's not like a waspy golf club. Okay, so... Like Writer's Block, the Ebell hosts events covering arts and culture, music, thought leaders, you name it. Which brings me to Desi Arnaz, the subject of Todd Purdum's terrific new book, The Man Who Invented Television. I don't know what gripped me more about this book, Desi's family history, patricians and aristocrats who lost it all, or his difficult entry into entertainment full of slights and countless degradations, or his tumultuous relationship with Lucille Ball and their interdependence notwithstanding his serial womanizing. And then there is the part that Todd and Sam will get to this evening, his relentless work ethic. Well, Desi's. I mean, oh, Todd's is relentless too. But Desi's relentless work ethic, his entrepreneurial genius in television programming, rights, and money. What makes this book so fun is its deceptively conversational nature. It's a work of such great scholarship. I raced through it because the Desi and Lucy stories deeply resonated with me, and they're so personal. And they become woven into that entrepreneurial genius aspect I just mentioned. This is a great study of a most complicated guy whose impact is no less than astonishing. Sam Wasson is another great biographer of people who have caused earthquakes in the world and business of entertainment. Francis Ford Coppola, Audrey Hepburn, Bob Fosse, and like his friend Todd, his books cover a specific moment in American culture through the lens of some of the most significant characters in the arts. So here's what's going to happen tonight. Sam and Todd will yak for a while, and then afterwards you can ask questions. I'm going to walk around with the mic so that the film will pick up your questions. Please wait for me to bring you the mic. Thanks a million. Todd Purdum and Sam Wasson.
First challenge,
Everyone. Oh, hi, everyone. Hi, Todd.
Hello, Sam.
I was good. The question. There's really only one question, but which is why did you write this book? But on the way over, I thought of another question, which is really a question that I have for you, and I only have one from me for you. So between us, why do you write biography?
That's a really good question, Sam. First of all, it's such a pleasure to be here with this Cuban weather tonight. We're all a little warm, and thank you to Andrea and Writer's Block, a great institution, and to the Ebell, and thank you, Sam, for doing this again. It's a treat for me to be in the Ebell because this is actually the scene of my one and only LA stage appearance 44 years ago this coming December. As a member of the Princeton Triangle show, I performed for Jimmy Stewart right over there, and it was a fun evening. But I guess one of the things about writing biography and writing nonfiction in general, like you, the books that I've done tend to recapture a particular moment in American life. And the challenge of writing nonfiction is we now know how it came out. We know that Audrey Hepburn and that black dress on Fifth Avenue became an icon in Breakfast at Tiffany's. And we know that I Love Lucy became a worldwide phenomenon. But when these people were making these cultural artifacts, they were just trying to do their job. And and in the case of Desi and Lucy, saved their marriage and worked together. And it's really fun to go back in time and try to take the reader through a narrative that reimagines the story before we know how it came out. And I guess for me, maybe that's a certain kind of wish fulfillment, because we don't know how the story right now is going to come out in the world we're living in, and maybe there's a certain comfort in going back to, like I've been watching a lot of baseball lately, because baseball has clear rules and winners and losers, and when the Dodgers lose, as they did last night in a heartbreaking way to the Giants, they play again. Sorry, they won the Giants series, the Phillies last night. They play again, and it's very nice to see that kind of thing. So it's kind of a windy answer, but it's part of it.
No, well, the question opens to wind. I mean, I was a little embarrassed asking it, but I really was thinking about it on the way. I mean, because there are all kinds of history, but this is a particular form, and it invites. I guess I ask it of myself. I mean, were you interested in Desi before you decided to write this book? Was he a part of your life, or did this emerge? How did this happen?
Yeah, I mean, I was interested in the sense that I'm 65, so I was too young to have seen I Love Lucy in its original, run. But every sick day from school when I was growing up, I Love Lucy was unavoidable on daytime television in the 1960s. So I became familiar with I Love Lucy and Desi. And then I was old enough to see Lucy's later series, particularly Here's Lucy, in real time. I remember very clearly watching that. And about 25 years ago or more, the first piece I ever wrote for Vanity Fair was about a single street in Beverly Hills, Roxbury Drive, where
this is a great piece.
Where Jimmy Stewart lived across the street from Lucille Ball, who lived next door to Jack Benny, who lived across the street from Rosemary Clooney and Jose Ferrer, and next door to Ira Gershwin, and so on. And these people all lived there, and Lucy dressed up like a witch and handed out Halloween candy, and Desi Arnaz Jr. would get in the cars of tourists and say, these star maps are very inaccurate. Let me show you where people really live, and fill them with a whole bunch of false information for $1. And Lucy Arnaz, that's the first time I met Lucy Arnaz, and she told me this wonderful story about how they were having dinner one night in their house, Lucy and her second husband, Gary Morton, and suddenly the door opened, and a strolling violinist came in a bandana, and it was Jack Benny playing the violin, just walking around their table, and he left and went back to the house next door. So I'd known about the world of Lucy and Desi, and I was fascinated by that kind of moment in time. But in 2020, I was involuntarily liberated from my job at the Atlantic, and it was a very traumatic experience to lose a job like that in the pandemic. And I asked around everyone I knew whether they had book ideas. And a good friend I went to college with, the late actor, playwright, director Doug McGrath, who wrote the book for the Broadway musical, the beautiful Carole King musical, among other many things.
And he wrote Bullets Over Broadway, with
Woody Allen, yeah. Anyway, he said, Desi has always gotten short shrift. And in 2020, you'll remember that we were at a moment in the culture when people were re-examining lives. The New York Times was running that whole series of obituaries called Overlooked, about people who maybe hadn't gotten credit in their day. And I thought Desi would make a good subject. And happily, after a little bit of adventures along the way, Simon & Schuster agreed. And I've been very gratified at the response.
What was the writing on Desi? It seems a perfect subject, because it's a no-brainer that nobody thought of.
Yeah, he had written a memoir in 1976, which was a modest success and very candid in its way. It's a pretty good book. It's very authentically in his voice. There have been a lot of biographies of Lucy and a number of books about Desilu and their work together, in which he obviously figures. But to me, the great opportunity was that Lucy Arnaz generously opened her family archive out in her house in Palm Springs and trusted me. She showed me these filing cabinets in her garage, set up a table for me to work with my laptop, and gave me access to everything from his high school report card to his medical records to his alcohol rehab discharge papers and everything in between. And she just had a treasure trove of documents that hadn't ever really been seen before. And that is every author's fondest wish, that you can find primary sources that
At what point in the process did you have that experience? Did you have a sense of Desi when you encountered those materials, or was that early enough that you didn't know
No,
who he
it was
was?
early enough. That was when I was in the process of writing the proposal. And so that's what made me absolutely sure that there would be enough to make a book. But then, interestingly, if any of you have read the book, or if you read it, you'll see that Desi struggled in many ways over many long years to be taken seriously in Hollywood because he didn't look or sound like everybody thought a mogul should sound. He was a refugee from Cuba. He wasn't an immigrant. He came here fleeing political turmoil in his home country. And I had a little bit of trouble persuading people that Desi was worth a book. Some people thought, who cares about Desi Arnaz? But eventually, I found my way to Simon & Schuster, where my editor, a very wonderful woman named Mindy Marquez, pretty recently hired by Simon & Schuster, had been the editor of the Miami Herald, where, among other things, she supervised the Pulitzer Prize-winning coverage of the original Jeffrey Epstein case. But her parents, she's Cuban-American, and her parents are from Santiago, Desi's hometown, and she instantly grasped the value of his story. And I think it's a really interesting lesson about what happens when we have cultural gatekeepers in positions of decision-making and authority who don't look like everyone else and might have a higher degree of appreciation for a story that doesn't seem like everyone else. Anyway, I pinched myself, and it's kind of kismet, and she's been wonderful to work with. She's also the editor of the great new book that just came out. I'm going to have a senior moment here, but the guy who won the Emmy the other day, the glasses in the pink suit. She's his editor too, so I'm in good company.
So let's go back to the beginning of Desi, which is one of my favorite parts of the book, because I'm in a place that I've never been to before. Most of us have never been to Cuba, and when was Desi born?
He was born in 1917. He would be the same age as JFK.
So one of the things that never surprises me in biography, is that the story seems to be done right away. I mean, the person is formed. Do you feel that Desi's childhood prepared him to be the Desi that he became?
It's an interesting question, Sam. That's a really good question, because I think people's personalities after probably about 10 years old don't change that much.
Me too, yeah.
So the part of him that was formed was the ebullient, larger-than-life character, charismatic, handsome, devil-may-care, adventurous. The part that wasn't formed is that he had this unbelievable role in entertainment, because he was raised as a prince in Santiago, the second largest city in Cuba.
Prince.
Really, I mean, his father was the mayor of the town. His mother's father was an executive at Bacardi Rum Company. His uncle was the chief of police. In later years, he went on the Tonight Show and told Johnny Carson, we had that town pretty well wrapped up. And he thought he was going to come to the United States and go to college at Notre Dame and become a lawyer. He was really on track to be kind of a spoiled rich kid, to tell you the truth. And then in 1933, in the then Cuban Revolution, which I have to say I didn't really know much about, 25 years before the one we think of with Castro, Gerardo Machado, the corrupt president, was overthrown. And because Desi's father had been in that regime, they fled to Miami with nothing in their pockets. And Desi reinvented himself as a self-taught musician. And that's when really the traits of personality and ebullience and sexiness and everything else that were formed in his youth came to the fore. But he then reached inside himself and found something else that you wouldn't have necessarily known would be there, and that was an enormous entrepreneurial spirit and drive.
He didn't know that he had that.
I'm not sure he did, no. I'm not sure he did. And people have asked me a lot in talking about the book whether I thought Desi was just incredibly talented or lucky, and I think the answer is that he was both. One of my favorite lines, there's a great E.B. White essay about New York that he wrote in the 1940s, and he said, "No one should come to New York to live unless he is willing to be lucky." And there's a definite part of self-will in Desi's story in which he made his own breaks, and he never took no as the final answer. And when people dismissed him or discounted him, he found a way around. And that's actually a kind of inspiring story for our time too, I think.
So what was his life before, because he meets Lucy quickly.
Yeah, so he comes to Miami and he becomes a musician. He goes to high school in Miami Beach, where one of his close friends is Al Capone Jr., whose father was in Alcatraz at the moment. And he gets spotted. He's playing at the Roni Plaza Hotel in Miami Beach, and he gets in a band called the Siboney Septet that had 5 members. And he gets spotted by Xavier Cugat, the king of the rumba, who was born in Spain but had come of age in Cuba. And before you know it, Desi is in the Waldorf Astoria playing with Cugat. But then he decides he wants to start his own band, and he goes back to Miami at New Year's time of 1937. And Cugat has sent him a motley crew of musicians who don't really know any Latin music. And they're about to get fired, and Desi has an inspiration. He goes to the kitchen because he remembers the conga, the incredible signature dance of carnival time back in Santiago. And he gets some frying pans and some blocks of wood and so on. He gives the band a swig of rum and tells them to start playing 1, 2, 3, kick. And the next thing you know, the conga line is snaking out onto the sidewalk, and he winds up at a nightclub in New York also called La Conga. And then he gets cast in a Broadway show by Rodgers and Hart called Too Many Girls. And he plays the Latin American football sensation Manuelito, who's being recruited by Princeton and Harvard and Yale, but winds up going to play for Potawatomi College in Arizona or New Mexico, someplace in the Southwest. And the show on Broadway was huge. Desi became an overnight sensation on Broadway. And when the movie was made, George Abbott, the director, hired him to come to RKO Studios up here on Melrose Avenue. And that's where he met Lucille Ball, who had been cast in the movie. And they were each dating other people. Desi was dating, among others, Betty Grable. And they broke up with their current flames, and within 6 months they had gotten married.
You say Desi was an overnight sensation. Was the Desi persona already in effect in that show? Do we know?
Yes, I think so. There's a wonderful oral history of his co-star in that show, a Puerto Rican actress and dancer named Diosa Costello, who was the sort of J-Lo of her day. She was a sensational entertainer. And she described helping him get hired at the nightclub in New York. And the manager said, what does he do? And she said, well, he doesn't sing so good. He doesn't play the guitar so good either. He doesn't play the conga so good either. But look at him. He's gorgeous. He'll draw every woman in New York. And indeed, Desi was musicianship. He never learned to read music. He wasn't, a deeply skilled musician, but by all accounts, he was an unbelievable performer. And his friend Ann Miller, the dancer who was in the movie Too Many Girls with Him, said that he was, one of the great personalities of all time. And that seems pretty clear.
That seems, yeah.
So
but I know I'm delaying the meeting of Lucy, but I couldn't help but dream of this thing. I mean, this is another question that I have for the world, but you're going to answer it. What, semi-related, why did nightclubs end?
television, I guess.
Is it really that?
Because it's amazing to me, also when I wrote my book about Rodgers and Hammerstein, I was stunned to see that Juanita Hall, who was the original Bloody Mary in that show, would perform the show. In those days, the curtain time on Broadway was 8:30. And she would finish that show at, 11:30 or whatever, and then go off and perform 2 nightclub shows at midnight and 2 in the morning. So who was going to a nightclub in New York in 1949 at 2 in the morning, and what were they earning, how were they living? I think people had a lot more fun, is what it boils down to.
I think, we talked upstairs briefly, like, was it really better then? Were things really better then? Do we romanticize the past? How much do we romanticize the past? And I think the fact of nightclubs proves that we don't.
Yeah, no, it's like when I wrote my book about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, I used to joke that the reason that bill got passed is because there was no air conditioning in Washington, and people stayed there and they didn't go home. There was no cheap airfares, and they drank. They drank all day and all night, and they worked on the bill together, and they got it done. So, that's an overstatement, but it is. I do wonder what would have happened to that bill without alcohol.
Okay, so Lucy, so Lucy and Desi, they meet, and how would you characterize that meeting?
Lightning strikes. There's a scene in the movie Too Many Girls. They're not romantically involved in the movie, but there's a scene where Lucy comes to this inn in Maine, and Desi is working as a waiter in a white waiter's jacket, and he sees this beautiful woman get out of the car, and he faints on the porch. He slides down the column. And it's interesting because the first time he saw her, Lucy was filming another movie on the RKO lot. And one of the great things about this book is that so much of it happened within 20 minutes of our house here in Hancock Park, Windsor Square. But so Lucy was making a movie with Maureen O'Hara called Dance Girl Dance. And she was playing a tough dance hall girl who'd been in a fight. And she came and her hair was torn and her dress was torn and she had a black eye. And Desi couldn't imagine how this actress could possibly be playing this dewy-eyed college girl ingenue in the movie. So later that afternoon, he was rehearsing a number, and this beautiful blonde woman with luminous blue eyes walked in tan slacks and a yellow sweater, and he said to the pianist, "Who's that?" And he said, "You met her this morning." He said, "I've never seen her in my life." And the guy said, "That's Lucille Ball." And Desi's answer was, "That's one hunk of a woman."
Yeah.
And
she was hot. She was hot.
Beautiful,
yeah.
and luminous, and she'd already made, by the time they met, she came to Hollywood in 1933, and by 1940 she had already made 60 movies.
And was she funny at this point?
By all accounts, she had a lot of pepper and ginger, but she was, everyone who knew her said she wasn't funny in real life in the sense of telling a joke. She couldn't tell a joke. She got tangled up in the telling. She forgot the punchline. But she had an enormous sense of joy and play. And when they got married and started their life in a little ranch in Chatsworth, they had costume parties, and she made hot and cold running appetizers all the time. And so I think she had high spirits. Her friend Marcella Rabwin, who was a crucial figure in Hollywood, she was David O. Selznick's secretary. She was kind of a surrogate mother to Judy Garland in a way. Her husband, who was the doctor at Cedars of Lebanon, had actually been responsible for Judy Garland's parents not aborting her when her mother was pregnant with her. But Marcella Rabwin had this terrible tragedy of serial miscarriages. And she describes in her memoir Lucille coming to see her in the hospital when she was feeling incredibly low. And Lucy came through the door, closed the door, and mimicked item by item an elaborate striptease. And she had Marcella in stitches. So she was apparently, whenever the humor involved activity, mimicry, physical comedy, then she was really funny.
It's always surprising to everyone that these things aren't obvious to the producers, that they don't know that in dealing with Lucille Ball, that they have Lucille Ball. They don't know who she is, what she can do.
Because in her movie career, she'd played tough girls and showgirls and society women, but she'd never really found her métier in comedy, although there were a couple of directors in her MGM years who thought she had a real gift for it. But it was really, in some important way, also Desi understood just how brilliant she could be in I Love Lucy.
So did it take being married to her to figure that out, or did it take working with her in some capacity for him to learn who she was and what she could do?
Sorry. I think he watched her in real life, and he watched her in the movies, and I think he must have. And then she had a very successful last of the era of radio sitcom. She had a successful sitcom called My Favorite Husband, and that was the prototype, the progenitor of I Love Lucy. And what happened is when CBS wanted to transfer the show to television, Lucy said, "I only want to do that if Desi can play my husband." And since the husband in the show was the waspy fifth vice president of a bank, even Desi felt he couldn't probably play that part. So that's why they came up with the concept of a band leader and his wife. But Lucy had, by that point, enough clout with CBS to say, if you want me, you're going to get him too.
So, but before even that, we have to set up this marriage. Because this marriage was many things. Was it, but before they start the show, was this a good marriage?
By all accounts, it was a very rich and connected and good marriage. I think they had a chemical connection that never left them. It was tempestuous from the beginning.
Yeah.
They fought, and the fighting which led to the making up was part of the whole drill. In the middle of World War II, when Desi was drafted in the Army and wound up entertaining the troops in hospitals in the San Fernando Valley and not coming home on the weekends, Lucy actually filed for divorce because she was sick of his playing around. And on the night before she was making her court appearance, he called her and said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Nothing particular." So they got together for dinner and wound up in bed. And the next morning, she got out of bed and he said, "Where are you going?" She said, "I have a new suit. I'm divorcing you." And she went to court, but they came right back and got in bed again, and that invalidated the provisional decree under California law. So they stayed together, and then, so I think it was one of these. It was, not placid,
Right.
but it was very intense. And she said she's a wonderful thing about when you're falling in love with someone you don't really understand why. And she said that she loved that Desi. She loved the way Desi smelled. She said he had a clean hair smell. He smelled like a baby, and it was that she was attracted to every little thing about him.
And when did the girls start? Were the girls there right away, or did that come in? And when did Lucy find out about?
The problem about it was the girls were there from the beginning and before, and she would say to him, too many girls is the story of your life. That's the problem with you. And their friend Marcella Rabwin said she never knew a time in their marriage when it wasn't troubled and tempestuous. And Desi's particular thing was that he felt as a Latin man, it was his right. His father and grandfather had both had parallel families in Cuba. Or his father, not families, but his grandfather did have a whole second parallel family. His father just had mistresses. But he thought this was,
normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the king of Siam. Man must be like honeybee and gather all he can. And Lucy never accepted. She never was really down with this, but she could tolerate it when it was private. Eventually, in the 50s, as their fame grew and his prominence grew and his problems got worse, it became glaringly public, and that was humiliating for Lucy. It was too hard for her to take.
Is it fair to say, this is a part of what I love about this story, is that I think, if this is accurate, that one of the reasons the show comes out of the need to keep the marriage together. Is that fair?
Absolutely. They wanted to work. Desi was on the road with his band, and that gave him opportunities to be faithful only in his fashion. And Lucy wanted to keep him at home. And they also wanted to have a baby. And in fact, their daughter, Lucille Arnaz, was born just about 6 weeks before I Love Lucy went on the air. So that was a crucial part of staying together in Los Angeles, working together.
It was practical.
Very practical. So it arose out of a very practical imperative, which was to have a project that would keep them together and to save their marriage and their careers, which were kind of, Lucy's movie career. She was approaching 40 then, as now, a dangerous age for a woman in Hollywood. And they were really risking everything by going into television, which was still a decidedly second-tier, déclassé, untested medium. And if you went into television, then it meant you were kind of, giving up on the movies. The movies might even blacklist you.
What was a sitcom before I Love Lucy around that time?
Well, there had been radio sitcoms, The Goldbergs and Fibber McGee and Molly, and my radio history is a little bit weak, but there definitely had been these situation comedies.
Honeymooners happened, or
the Honeymooners happened a little bit later, but right around this same rough era, and the thing about I Love Lucy, it's out of time and space. There's never a reference to.
Right.
It's a domestic.
Right.
Comedy of rivalry and friendship and avarice and ambition. It's not. You don't know that Harry Truman's president or
no.
The Korean War is going on. You don't know any of that. It's not topical at all. It's like Greek comedy.
Another thing that is so moving to me is that these two people, married, discover these talents that they didn't know that they had at this moment at the same time. And in that discovery, they really do change. I mean, that's not an overstatement. They really do change television.
Yeah, they were there at the beginning, and they took the risk and did it. And I think Lucy Arnaz said to me, it must have been like the Wright brothers. You invented flying.
Right.
Now what are you going to do? And the poignant reality is that neither one of them ever again, alone, did anything that approached what they did together, and arguably neither had done anything up to that point that equaled what they did together. So they were like this perfect match of synchronicity, and he was a wonderful foil for her. The other thing that I realized early on that was a kind of a through line that I tried to keep in mind in writing the book is that it's really, we see Lucy in I Love Lucy. Desi is our stand-in. We see Lucy through Desi's eyes. And I think in some ways, if he can love her at the end of the 30 minutes, despite all the scrapes she's gotten him into, we will love her too. And I think he's our guide. And
Yes. And he's one of the, I can't think of another off the top of my head, but he's a straight man who isn't dull. He could be his own sitcom.
Yeah, I mean, he's very lively, and he's also strong. There's a bunch of scholarship about how doofy 50s sitcom dads were. Ozzie Nelson in Ozzie and Harriet, Robert Young in Father Knows Best, Hugh Beaumont in Leave It to Beaver. They're all a little bit doofy. And whatever Ricky Ricardo was, he was in control and in command. And he had a somewhat exotic job as a band leader. But, he was the breadwinner, and he was the solid citizen who kept things in control. And no one would ever say that a bunch of television critics in the 1950s said that television had emasculated the American man in these sitcoms and had feminized him and made him into, and no one would ever say that about Desi Arnaz.
So Desi as a producer, I mean, the book is the man who invented television. What was Desi's vision, contribution, challenge as a producer of this show? Is that right? I mean, was he the producer?
He became a producer eventually.
Okay.
He was functionally a producer from the beginning, although he didn't have it in name. The showrunner and the producer was a very talented man named Jess Oppenheimer, who had worked with Fanny Brice and a bunch of other people, and had been the person who ran the My Favorite Husband. But what happened is, just as the show was born out of the impulse to save their marriage, the technical innovations that Desi helped develop were born of necessity of producing a television show in Los Angeles. And that's because in 1951, television was almost exclusively a live medium. It was centered in New York because it was a sponsor-driven medium. That's where the advertising agencies were. And there was not yet a coaxial cable that could enable broadcast of a signal across the whole country. Nor was there videotape. So the only way you could preserve a television program for subsequent viewing was to film off a television monitor something called a kinescope that produced a muddy, cruddy copy that could not be improved on. So CBS, the first thing they said after they greenlit the show was, when are you moving to New York? And Lucy and Desi said, no, the whole point is to stay here. And the sponsor, Philip Morris, the advertising man who bought the show was a man named Milton Beo, and he's Matthew Broderick's grandfather. And they said, we're not going to have this show be seen clearly by, 1/3 of the country in the West and on a kinescope in the big markets of New York and Chicago. So they said, if you do that in Los Angeles, you will have to film it, and that will cost more. And Desi then said, all right, well, we're in the 90% tax bracket already, so if we take $1,000 a week pay cut for 39 weeks, it's not going to hurt our take-home pay that much. Then I want to own the negative.
And what does that mean, owning the negative?
Oh, that means he owned the show. He owned the film of the show, which was the foundation of what became the Desi-Lou Studio empire, and led ultimately to their role as producer and landlord of shows of Danny Thomas, Dick Van Dyke, Andy Griffith. And after their divorce, when Lucy was running the company, the last two pilots that she was pitched, her advisor said to her, these are very expensive, they'll be cash flow negative, you're not going to see any yield for a long time, and if you greenlight these projects, you will have to sell the company. And she said, well, I believe in them. And the two projects were Star Trek and Mission Impossible. So it was all, in a way, accidental that they wanted to work in Los Angeles. And then the other thing that happened was filming the show in front of a live audience, which was another innovation, because a movie studio is a soundstage is a working factory
This
floor.
was the first live audience for a...
There had been, Ralph Edwards was experimenting with doing this technique with 3 cameras at once with the game show Truth or Consequences. But this was really the first live audience with 3 cameras at once, which became the norm for All in the Family, Mary Tyler Moore, Friends, Big Bang Theory, you name it. Because that quickly was seized on by Hollywood as a wonderful way to make a comedy, it helped very quickly lead the shift of television production from New York to Los Angeles, where it obviously remains to this day. Sorry, I don't mean to not talk into the mic.
And did it save the marriage?
It saved the marriage in the sense that it made them beloved archetypes and world famous, and propelled them to the A-list in Hollywood, which was something they had never been on before. I think ultimately the strain of working together 24/7 and being at home and at work probably helped hurt their marriage in the end. There was just too much togetherness. But they might have even survived that if Desi had not fallen prey to a really terrible addiction and alcoholism, which paradoxically, or maybe not so paradoxically, happened right at the moment of his peak success. He'd always liked to drink, and but as the company got bigger, his responsibilities got bigger, the pressures got bigger, and he was not only playing Ricky Ricardo, but running this multi-million-dollar company. He really just fell into the grip of a terrible drinking problem, and would order tomato soup in the morning and lace it with vodka, and he was non-functional afternoon apparently. But
Did he ever try to get help or AA, or was he?
The last year, his executives tried to give him the big book of AA. They never tried to stage what we would now call an intervention. And you have to remember that at that time there wasn't a culture of people going to rehab and then being on the cover of People magazine and talking about their getting better. It was deeply stigmatizing. AA itself was less than 20 years old. And plus Desi was a super macho, proud Latin man who was not going to be too likely to. He did consult a psychiatrist. Who was
yes.
a partner. He and Lucy together went for marriage counseling to the Reverend Norman Vincent Peale, who wrote, The Power of Positive Thinking, and married Donald and Ivana Trump, actually. But Peale had a partner who was a psychiatrist named Smiley Blanton, and he had been analyzed by Freud himself. And Desi and Lucy went for a few marriage counseling sessions with him, but it didn't really take. But then in the last year of his life, after Desi Jr., their son, had his own very well-chronicled struggles with alcohol and drugs and got sober, Desi did go to treatment at Scripps Hospital in San Diego, and he got sober in the last year of his life, and then he got lung cancer and died. But he did finally, he registered under the name of Bill Sanchez, and he went, and Lucille Arnaz told me that when he stood up and said, my name is Desi and I'm an alcoholic, that it was the proudest day of her life, and she cried and cried.
You got, I think, so lucky in that you found the therapists, you found the notes.
Yeah, Dr. Blanton's notes.
Yes, and when, not every biographer gets that. And, I often dream, I think, God, well, if only I could talk to the shrink, right? And you, in a way, did.
From the grave, there was the shrink talking, and he was analyzing Desi's Rorschach test and saying he had probably an unhealthy, he probably lacked unconditional parental love. His father was very demanding. His mother was extremely narcissistic. When his parents got divorced, he was saddled with the care and feeding of his mother for the rest of his life. And she was apparently very demanding and difficult person. And he was very good to her, but I think it probably must have driven him slightly crazy. And so, yeah, that was an enormous gift to have these records that Lucille Arnaz trusted me with. And I felt a little nervous because, the end of the story is definitely somewhat sad. But she told me just follow where the story leads.
She didn't try to control you in any way?
Nope.
Did you feel
never. She
crowded?
Said, nope, she didn't want any approval. She wanted to read the manuscript. She made some wonderful factual corrections. She corrected some pagination. She caught spelling and punctuation mistakes. Her mother raised her well. She went to Immaculate Heart High School and was a very good student, I think. And but no, she made no demands on me at all to change the tone or.
Were there questions you were afraid to ask?
Not really. And then her husband, Larry Luckenbill, was also very generous, and he told me this poignant scene when Desi was sick and really dying in the hospital, and they were putting him on an inclined table to drain his lungs. Lucy had gripped his hand hard, and he held her hand, but he was really unable to be vulnerable enough to really grip it back. And he just was so proud to the end that he didn't want to seem dependent. No, there weren't really any questions I was afraid to ask her, I think.
In this book, I learned, because I only knew Desi and Lucy, but there were achievements beyond the show. I mean, I was particularly touched by not touched, but impressed by the Untouchables. I didn't know about this, and not only was it interesting in itself, but it goes to prove that Desi really wasn't just lucky, that
Yeah.
he knew or learned how to do this.
Yeah, The Untouchables, which started out as a two-part, essentially television movie for something called the Desilu Playhouse. After 6 seasons of the regular half-hour I Love Lucy, Lucy and Desi persuaded CBS to let them do occasional hour-long specials, which would be interspersed with other programming. And eventually they created something called the Desilu Playhouse, which was an anthology series that had the episode that led to The Twilight Zone, actually. But The Untouchables started out as a two-part episode about Elliot Ness, and the Prohibition agent in Chicago, who was fighting the Capone gang, actually. And it was such a success that ABC picked it up as a series, and it was an hour-long program that they really deployed for the first time full-bore motion picture techniques. So they shot at night. They used a large number of vintage automobiles. It was very graphic for the time. And it sparked the first real sustained debate about violence on television, and also a debate in which Italian Americans were very upset about the portrayal of Italian Americans that foreshadowed the controversy that would come a decade later when The Godfather was being made. And Desi was really the driving force behind getting that on the air, persuading Robert Stack to play the part, and it became a sensation.
So, I always think, do you, that biography really is memoir? Do you agree, or kind of a Barbara Walters question, but there it is. I mean,
What kind of a tree?
but also, yeah, what kind of a tree? But it's also a good question. I mean, were you telling your story in any way?
Yes, I think I was in some important ways. I shared with you when we were at Chevalier's this summer that when I was writing this book, I realized that I had developed a terrible alcohol problem and had to get sober myself. And I did, and I am, and I have been for a little more than 5 years now. And I don't think I would have written the same kind of book if I hadn't understood a little bit viscerally what Desi was going through, what it meant to him, the challenges that had been, and also seeing the ways in which he didn't take advantage of opportunities that were offered to him to make a course correction. But I felt enormous empathy for Desi, and also enormous frustration. I mean, he's irresistible. I really liked him, but sometimes you want to smack him alongside the head, and say, "Come on, wake up." But he was the thing that he got by on was that he was so charming and that he was irresistible. And I think the trauma of his childhood, he clearly suffered from what we would now call untreated PTSD, losing everything. He saw his home sort of destroyed, people's heads on pikes, destruction, fiery, ruins, when he was 17 years old. And I think that haunted him for the rest of his life in a way that he didn't, sound like Dr. Brothers or whatever. He didn't process.
Yeah.
And Lucy herself had a significant childhood trauma. Her father died before she was 4 years old. She was shunted around to a bunch of different relatives' houses. She lacked a strong family unit for much of her childhood. And I think that must have been below the waterline, something that had drawn them together in a way, that they were each kind of wounded people who found each other in this way. So yeah, I mean, I felt, and then actually, as I told you, because it had taken a lot of time for people to take the book seriously, to take the idea seriously, I began to identify with Desi like, I mean, well into his career, well into the 1970s, newspaper profiles of Desi rendered his speech in dialect, as if he, the thins I did before are not the thin. It's just insane. And so I felt a great deal of identification with Desi, well, it really chaps my ass that my alma mater, the New York Times, has not reviewed this book. And I think it's just plain snobbery that they just don't think Desi Arnaz is a serious person or worth consideration. And
that's outrageous.
Maybe there are a lot of other reasons, but in any case, I think there is a lot of snobbery, like Desi Arnaz, who cares about him? And one of the things that meant the most to me is when I went on Fresh Air with Terry Gross, she said, she said on the air, I always love having you on the show, but when I heard you were writing about Desi Arnaz, I thought, like, what? But the book is really wonderful and interesting.
Yeah.
And so my father used to, have this backhanded compliment that what people would say, you sweat less than any fat person I ever danced with. And in a way, I feel that I've given you a long answer, but
Good.
Yes, I feel a strong sense of identification with Desi's strengths and his weaknesses.
I think you say this in the book too, and this really crystallized it for me, that a lot of people hold Ricky against Desi, and they think that's who he is.
That's all there was. Yeah.
That's all there was. But there really wasn't. I mean, is it an oversimplification to say that without Desi there would be no Lucy, and without Lucy there would be no Desi?
I think that's a very fair thing to say, that in the sense that they wouldn't be the world. He made her. He crucially helped make her one of the most famous women in the world. In the 1980s, TV Guide estimated that her face had been seen more often by more people than the face of any human being who ever walked the earth.
Wow.
And
Wow.
And she, to her dying day, credited Desi absolutely with that. In her maddest moment about him, she never hesitated to give him credit for that. And of course, he would have been a band leader who was, made some records about Cuban music, and we might, you might hear them on a vintage radio show or something, but she made him a world famous figure too.
I love this show also because everybody agrees on I Love Lucy. I mean, I don't think have you in your travels and talking about this met anyone who says, I don't know, I never got it. It doesn't, it seems like it's one of those things that everybody loves.
Actually, the only person I can think of who said he didn't ever really like I Love Lucy is Aaron Sorkin, who made that movie.
Well, it shows.
Being the Ricardos, which was filmed in this room, by the way. The nightclub scene was filmed in this room. But
he didn't like.
He said he didn't really think I Love Lucy was very funny. But in Washington, when I was doing a book event with my old colleague Maureen Dowd, a woman in the Q&A said something very touching to me, which was that in the political environment we live in, she and her mother can't talk about anything anymore, but they talk about I Love Lucy. And
right.
I thought that was wonderful.
Right. And young people today that don't even seem to laugh at anything. They laugh at I Love Lucy.
If you show them the chocolates,
they'll laugh.
It's wonderful.
They'll laugh.
Yeah.
Oh wait, I have to ask you on behalf of my mother. The chocolate scene. Where was that shot?
It was shot in on the studio that's now backs up on Lillian Way. You know where the Pavilions is on Vine Street?
Yes.
You can still see the little brackets where the signs hung there, but it was shot in that studio.
So that was not a location?
No, sorry. That was shot at what's now the Sunset Las Palmas studios on Las Palmas
Okay.
Avenue. But it was not a location. But they did get somebody come from the farmer's market to show them how to, I think, the farmer's market. There's a rumor that it was See's. It was not See's. But they got somebody who was an expert candy dipper to come show them.
Edelweiss, my mom says. Edelweiss, does that ring a bell?
I'm not sure. Edelweiss Chocolates in Beverly
Yeah,
Hills.
yeah.
They definitely got some Los Angeles chocolate maker to come
They
show
did.
them.
They got. Do folks know about that? Little John's?
I think
Little
it was
John's.
in the farmer's
Okay,
market.
yeah. Well, you guys, Todd, this book, I cannot believe anyone would hesitate to publish this book, and this book is definitive. It was necessary, and it's also an American story. This is an immigrant success story in Hollywood, which we didn't even touch on. But there's so many different layers to peel back. And it's terribly sad, terribly beautiful, very sexy too, with brothel scenes.
With brothel scenes.
With brothel scenes, in case you were vacillating.
Well, I want to say, I don't want to sound like I'm feeling sorry for myself here, because the book has been a pleasure to write and a pleasure to, so if I sounded in any way down in the mouth.
No, you didn't. I just think that Desi is underappreciated, which is why one of the reasons why we do what we do, is to say, look here.
Yeah, I'm
Thank you,
furious.
Todd.
I'm furious that the New York Times didn't review it. I'm furious. I'm going to send them a
Yeah,
letter to the
That doesn't
editor.
make any
I
sense, Todd.
owe my life to the New York
There's
Times,
something
so.
weird. There's something weird there. Yeah.
Okay, I'm holding the mic, and okay, you have a question. Anybody over here? Nope. Okay, we're going first to you.
I'm curious, what were they like as parents?
It's a very good question. And both Lucy Arnaz and Desi Jr. talked to me at some length about that. Desi said, we never doubted that they loved us. We never doubted that they did the best they could. I think one of the things that Lucy Arnaz in particular gets a lot of credit for from me is she's very clear-eyed about her parents' legacy. She understands that they belong to all of us and they belong to the world. And she's extremely appreciative of their talent. She's under no illusions about their failings as people and parents, which were pretty pronounced. But she's not bitter about it. And I think as the mother of 3 children of her own and 2 stepchildren by her husband, Larry Luckenbill, she understands the challenges of being a parent. And I think, you know, they were working incredibly hard when the children were young, and then they got divorced. And the happy part is they had a very successful divorce. The tension went out of their relationship after they got divorced, and they were co-parents to the kids. Desi Jr. lived fast and hard when he was a teenager. He really had a lot of problems with drugs and alcohol and got clean himself eventually. But I think they were, both Lucy and Desi said that Desi was, you know, as a stereotypical father of that era, kind of the Dutch uncle who would say, do you want to, especially after the divorce. I said, who was more fun? She said, well, my mother was worried about homework and doctor's appointments. And my dad would say, do you want to go swimming or horseback riding? And it's not a fair comparison. Lucy apparently, though, when she didn't like something that the kids had done, would literally like maybe not speak to them for days and freeze them out. And Desi was never like that. He would have an explosion. He would have a big temper. He would have a thunderstorm, especially if he was drinking. And then he would approach them and try to make amends. He would never apparently say, Lucy said to me, the thunderstorm never apologized, but he then, you know, let's go have some ice cream or something. What? Oh, well, so thank you. This is my wife and prompter here, Desi, Desi supporter, Dee Dee Myers. But his second wife, Desi, both Lucy and Desi remarried and made pretty happy second marriages. Desi married a woman named Edie Hirsch, whose husband, Clement Hirsch, had been the Cal-Can pet food mogul. And Desi acquired a 9-year-old stepson named Greg Hirsch. And Greg Hirsch told me that they had gone deep sea fishing at one point early in the relationship, and Desi was very proud of his boat. He kept it at, in those days, Del Mar. And Lucy caught a marlin, and they raised a blue flag on the boat for that. And Desi caught a sailfish, and they raised a red flag. But Greg caught a wahoo, which is a large fish, very big fish, broke the rod. But there was no flag for it, and he began to cry. So Desi told his wife, go below and take off your bra. And she said, what? And he said, just trust me. So he tells Greg, now when we come into the harbor, they're going to see the blue flag for the marlin and the red flag for the sailfish. And they're going to see the bra, and they're going to go, wahoo, and that's for your fish. And, I mean, I think that's a stepfather we'd all like to have, probably. So.
Okay, we got one over here.
Todd, you did an excellent job of giving Desi his due. When Desi wrote his book, was that his plan to give himself his own due? Because at times, you know, there's that memorial he said about Lucy. He says 90% of the show was Lucy. We'll take the other 10%. But where did he stand?
Yes, I think part of the impulse for writing his book, which came out in 1976, was to give himself the credit he felt he had been denied, and he over-rotated a little bit to give himself sometimes more credit than he actually deserved, because I think he was frustrated. So, for example, the family of Jess Oppenheimer to this day, and they were very helpful to me too, they're pretty frustrated that if you read Desi's memoir, you'd never know that Jess Oppenheimer was the producer and showrunner of it doesn't really come up in the book. I think Desi, by the end of his life, because he was suffering probably depression and he had spiraled into a kind of a self-pitying mode, I think he wondered if he would be, if his achievements would be remembered. If I, in some very small way, have helped rebalance the scales, I feel I have succeeded in what I set out to do. And I tried to be very careful to make the point that Desi's achievement in with this regard was often that he hired excellent people and gave them their head and let them do their jobs, that he was a wonderful recruiter of talent. I mean, the I Love Lucy, the Desi Lou Alumni Club is quite remarkable. Jay Sandrich, who directed almost all the Mary Tyler Moore and Cosby shows, started as an assistant director at Desi Lou. Quinn Martin, who created the FBI and Barnaby Jones, was a sound editor. Aaron Spelling, who went on to have a huge career, started as a bit actor in an I Love Lucy episode. And there are a lot of people who cut their teeth in the Desi Lou organization. So I think one of his talents was as a picker of talent, a spotter of talent.
Okay, one last question.
I have one more.
Okay, well then.
No, go ahead, and then I'll have
exactly.
Oh, there's another one.
Hi, Todd. Thank you for that. Amazing. Thank you. You talked about having access to therapy notes. While you were looking at those, were you concerned at all about perhaps non-existent HIPAA laws, or was there anything else that you found in that garage that gave you pause and said, I can't?
Yeah, the therapy notes, they were really a series of like 3 or 4 letters. So they were not the psychiatrist's notes to himself. They were letters to the patient. And I guess because I had the support of, Desi's executor, I didn't try to see if I should get a permission from the descendants of Dr. Smiley Blanton. But yes, you're always a little bit, you wonder, and I'll tell you, for example, there were things that Desi said in draft material for his memoir that I didn't include in the book because they were sort of single source and I didn't trust them. So, for example, there was an angry passage in which he accused Lucy of having an affair with everybody in Hollywood, from John Wayne to Jimmy Stewart to whoever. And it didn't seem credible to me. And I didn't, now I've just said it here, but I didn't put it in the book. And I think, but you're always a little leery. Yes, you are sensitive to that. And that's why it meant so much to me to have the support of the family who said, let the chips fall where they may, because you don't want to get crosswise with.
Wait, Sam, we have one more
Okay.
question.
Mine's a quick one, so we'll have time for me.
Ricky Ricardo's famous song was Babalu. What was Desi Arnaz's relationship with Santeria?
It's a really good question. I don't know that he had any personal relationship. Babalu is a Cuban song written by Margaret Licona in 1938 or 39, and it celebrates the Santeria god Babalu Ai, and he is the deity that is the repository of sickness and trouble and strife, and he actually Babalu became a totem in the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s for some gay men. Desi was a popularizer of that song, and I think the purest students of Cuban music would say that he kind of sanded it down in a mass market way, the way Elvis Presley sanded down black music for white audiences. So I don't think Desi was a good Catholic altar boy, and I don't think not that there's anything wrong with Santeria, but I don't think he had any personal connection to the Santeria religion, which is a blend of Catholicism and Native and Afro-Cuban traditions. And he certainly was very conversant with the traditions of Afro-Cuban music. And when I was in Santiago, one of the things that's palpable there, even in the terrible straitened circumstances people have to live in Cuba today, that is the cradle of Cuban music, Santiago. And he would have grown up with music wafting through the windows day and night, everywhere.
My last one I know the answer to, but I'm just too excited, and I know this crowd will be too. What is your next book?
Well, if I can get my act together to finish writing a proposal and find a willing editor again, Norman Lear's widow, Lynn, has given me first crack at his archive, and I've begun researching the life and times of Norman Lear. And in a way, he did for television in the 1970s something akin to what Desi had done in the 1950s in terms of revolutionizing the industry and significantly returning to the use of live three-camera method, which had fallen out of favor in the 1960s, in part because in shows like My Three Sons, Fred McMurray wanted to film all his scenes at once and play golf. So that's my hope.
So we'll be back here in 3, 4, 20 years.
From your lips to Ebell's ears.
Todd, thank you.
Thank you.
You're
Sam,
wonderful.
so much. Thank you so
You're
much.
great,
Really
Todd. Thank you. Thank you.
So great.
I have one more thing to say. We have Todd's book in the lobby, which he will sign, and we also have Sam's most recent book on Francis Ford Coppola, which he will sign. So make it a big night and get both of them. Thank you.